He came to talk about a movie. He left carrying something he hadn't put down in 20 years. Nobody in the Ed Sullivan Theater saw it coming. Not the producers, not the 300 people in the audience, not even Stephen Colbert, and Stephen Colbert has seen everything. It was supposed to be a routine Thursday night. The late show set glowed under its signature blue and crimson lights, Manhattan's skyline blinking softly behind the desk like it always did. John Batiste had the crowd warm and loose, laughing before the first guest even walked out. Stephen had just finished a monologue that left the front rows breathless. The energy was exactly what it was supposed to be: bright, fast, alive. Tom Hanks walked out to the kind of applause that only comes for a certain kind of person. Not just famous, beloved. There's a difference, and every person in that theater understood it the moment he appeared. At 68, he still moved with that unhurried ease, that quality of a man who had nothing to prove and no interest in pretending otherwise. Navy blazer, white shirt, no tie. The graying hair perfectly imperfect. The smile, that smile, landing on the front row like a handshake. He sat down, the audience settled, and for the first several minutes everything went exactly as planned. "So Tom," Stephen began, leaning forward with that particular warmth he reserved for guests he genuinely liked. "This new film, Miles Between Us, it's a father and son cross-country road trip reconnection story. What pulled you toward it?" Tom shifted slightly, comfortable, unhurried. "You know, Stephen, there's something about that relationship that nobody ever fully resolves. Fathers and sons, we spend half our lives trying to understand each other and the other half pretending we already do." The audience gave an easy, knowing laugh. "The film deals with class distance," Tom continued, his voice carrying that distinctive warmth that had anchored American cinema for 4 decades. "A blue-collar father, a son who's moved into a different world, and there's this tension between love and, well, sometimes shame." Stephen's eyes moved to Tom's face. Something had shifted in the last word, not much, just enough. He set down his note cards. "Is that something you can relate to, personally?" Tom's smile didn't disappear, but for just a moment, one single moment that the cameras caught and the audience missed, something moved behind his eyes, something old. "Actually," he said quietly, "yes, more than I'd like to admit." The studio didn't go silent immediately. It happened the way weather changes, gradually, then all at once. People leaned forward without realizing they were doing it. Something in Tom's voice had changed register entirely. This wasn't a movie promotion anymore. Stephen recognized it immediately. He had been doing this long enough to know the difference between a celebrity staying on message and a human being arriving at a door they hadn't planned to open. He stayed very still. "Want to talk about it?" he asked, simply, gently. Tom looked at Stephen, then at the audience, then back at Stephen. When he spoke again, it wasn't with the polished cadence of a man who had done 10,000 interviews, it was with the voice of a son. "My dad was a truck driver," Tom said. "His name was Amos. He drove long haul for 37 years. He had these huge hands calloused from loading cargo, and he always smelled like diesel fuel and coffee. He was the hardest working man I ever knew in my life." Stephen nodded once, slowly. "When I was coming up in Hollywood, broke, doing dinner theater, sleeping on friends' couches, he'd call every Sunday, every single Sunday. He'd ask how the acting business was going, and I could hear it in his voice. How proud he was, even when I had nothing to show for it." Tom's fingers moved absently along the arm of his chair. "But then things changed. Good roles came, real money came, a nicer neighborhood came, and somewhere in all of that," his voice caught slightly, "somewhere in all of that I started to feel embarrassed by where I came from. The silence in the studio was total, the kind of silence that has weight. I remember the first time I brought him to a premiere. This was around 1988 after Big. He flew out to Los Angeles and he was so excited. He wore his best suit, the one he'd gotten married in. He kept asking me if he looked okay." Tom paused. "And I was ashamed of him, Stephen. I was ashamed of my own father standing next to me." Stephen's expression showed nothing but compassion. He didn't move, he didn't speak, he just held the space open. He didn't know how to talk to producers or studio executives. He'd start sentences with "my boy Tommy here," and tell stories about me as a kid that I thought were embarrassing. He ordered beer at the after-party where everyone was drinking wine. He asked the photographer for one more picture because he wanted to show his friends back home. A few people in the audience had their hands over their mouths. And I kept moving him away from important people. Dad, why don't you get some air? Maybe we should head back to the hotel? I was treating my own father like a problem to be managed. Tom's eyes were wet now, but he didn't stop. This went on for years, Stephen. Every visit, every event. I'd feel this quiet shame about his work boots, his way of speaking, his excitement about things that seemed small to me. I'd gotten so deep into this new world that I forgot the one that made me. Stephen stood up from behind his desk. It was a quiet movement, no performance to it, no signal to the cameras. He simply stood, walked around to where Tom was sitting and placed a hand on his shoulder. He didn't say anything yet, he just stayed there. The last real conversation we had was about 3 weeks before he died. Tom's voice dropped. He called on a Sunday like always, but this time he didn't ask about my work. He said. Tom stopped, collected himself, started again. Tommy, I know you're embarrassed of me, son. I know I don't fit into your world, but I want you to know I understand, and I'm not mad about it. Someone in the front row was openly crying. I should have told him right then. I should have said I wasn't embarrassed, that I was sorry, that I loved him exactly as he was. Instead, I said something like, "Don't be silly, Dad," and changed the subject. I told myself I'd fix it the next time we talked. He looked down at his hands. He had a heart attack 2 weeks later, died at a truck stop in Nebraska. I got the call during a script meeting for Philadelphia. Stephen knelt down beside Tom's chair, not quickly, not dramatically, but with the slow deliberateness of a man choosing something on purpose. He brought himself to eye level and looked at Tom directly. "Tom," he said, his voice was low, not for the cameras, for Tom, "your father loved you. And I can tell you with certainty, he knew you loved him too." Tom looked at him. "How do you know that?" "Because I'm looking at his son right now. And the man sitting in this chair, the man who just told the most painful story of his life to 300 strangers because he wants someone else to learn from it, that man was raised right. That didn't come from nowhere." Subscribe and leave a comment because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. The audience began to applaud, not the reflexive, cued applause of a television tapping, something slower, something earned. Stephen remained where he was and spoke directly into the camera. If you're watching this at home and you have a parent whose world feels different from yours, whose shoes or vocabulary or excitement doesn't match the life you've built, please hear this. Love them exactly as they are. Thank them for the sacrifices you probably don't even know about, because the distance between blue collar and white collar is nothing. Nothing, compared to the distance between love and regret. He turned back to Tom. "Tell me something," Stephen said. "You mentioned once that you carry something of your father's into every role you play. What is it?" Tom blinked, then a small smile, the first real smile in 20 minutes, moved across his face. He had this phrase he'd say, "Well now," at the beginning of sentences when he was thinking something through. "Well now, let me see. Well now, that's something to consider. Just a small thing, a verbal tick. So now in every film, every character, I try to work those words into at least one scene." Stephen's eyes lit up quietly. "So he's still there, in every story you tell?" "Yeah," Tom said, his voice was steadier now. "I figured if I couldn't tell him I was proud to be his son while he was alive, I could at least carry a piece of him with me into the work." Stephen returned to his desk, but the formal architecture of the interview was gone. It had dissolved somewhere around the word ashamed and never came back. "You've spent your entire career playing characters who represent American decency," Stephen said. "Kindness, integrity, ordinary courage. You think that's coincidence? You think that came from nowhere?" Tom considered it, really considered it, not as a talking point but as a question he hadn't been asked before. "I never thought about it that way. Your father drove trucks for 37 years. He raised a son with enough character to become one of the most trusted people in this country. He never stopped being proud of you even when he thought you weren't proud of him. That man did not fail at anything. That man succeeded at everything that matters." Tom was crying openly now, but differently. The grief was still there, but something else had moved in alongside it, something lighter. "Tom," Stephen said, "is there anything you want to say to him right now?" Tom looked into the camera, not at the audience, not at Stephen, past all of it into something only he could see. "Dad, I'm sorry I was too scared to tell you when you were alive how proud I am to be Amos Hank's son. You were the strongest, most honest man I ever knew. Every character I've played who showed any real decency, that came from you. You weren't the embarrassment. I was, and I'm sorry it took me this long to understand that." The studio held its breath. "And to anyone watching who has a parent like my dad, someone who works with their hands, who gets excited about things that might seem small, love them. Thank them, be proud of them out loud while you still can, because the world doesn't have enough of them. It never did." Stephen let the silence stand for a moment before he spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, looking out at the audience, "the most important performance we ever give isn't on a screen. It's in how we treat the people who loved us before we were anyone." As the show wound down and the house lights slowly shifted, 300 people sat in a theater in Midtown Manhattan and felt, collectively, the particular weight of something they had witnessed rather than merely watched. That night, laughter gave way to grace, and television remembered what it was for.